Charles McGibney's Walkera X350 Pro that came into the shop. They did the powertrain mod, and then after calibrating the ESCs, they would try to throttle up, and the two front motors would start first, and then depending on how the accelerometer was calibrated, one of the two back motors would start first, and then so you'd get these two starting up. Then the higher you get with the throttle, this one would start. But I calibrated the accelerometer, and these two swapped. So I was like, we got some kind of motor mixing issue going on in the firmware and the param. Although they told me they reflashed the firmware and put the stock param back in, I reflashed the firmware again and then loaded my stock param that I have, that I use for everybody, and this is what we get. Perfecto. And the ESC's blinking like that is totally normal. When you get the full throttle, they're going to start dimming out, letting you know you're at max throttle, especially with a lower battery. But now all four of his motors are starting up at the same time. And that's without calibrating the accelerometer yet, after I put the stock param back in. So now this one's ready to get all of the solder work redone because it's pretty atrocious. I have to get in here and get some of this taken care of, because this is not how I'm gonna send something out. And after I've, when I've worked on something, and all these, my phone's not really focusing, but here we go. All these solder joints like this, they all, from between the ESCs and the power board, and especially like right here, if I can get it to focus, that around that solder joint has to be cleaned, because you leave stuff like that caked up around the joint, and it causes the joint to break down. Like here, these solder connections, that has to be cleaned up, and it's going to look like this when I get it done. You can have a little bit of that stuff around the joints, but I usually get that cleaned up even better than that before I send it out. But that's the kind of stuff you want right there. Here's a power board connection, nice shiny. I redid these because I changed his plugs and his cables. Nice shiny, clean, no. I also resolder these caps, and this is critical on the power boards. This cap right here, that one right there, the end right here, I should have something to point here with, but right here on the end will arc when it loses connection, because that's where all the current's going through for your 5-volt stuff, to filter the 12-volt supply to the 5-volt BEC. And when the BEC's loaded and that connection gets what they call a cold solder joint, then you end up drawing a lot of current across right here, across that joint, and it sparks and burns the trace right here. It's actually this trace going into the chip. So I solder that capacitor. If you look at this capacitor right here, you'll notice it's stock. I'll solder it too. I also solder this diode because the factory, they solder these. When they solder these, they don't do it by hand. They place all these parts on a graph, and the graph holds them down on these surfaces, and then they put a small little bead of solder, a little dot of solder with flux on each side of these contacts, and then they put this in a baking oven and they bake those connections on, and it doesn't make a very good connection. It has to be cleaned up and has to have a lot more solder built on it for, whenever that connection starts to break down. If there's not a lot of solder there, then it'll crack and you'll lose current, and then it'll spark on you, and that's when your power board shorts out and you stop getting 5 volts to everything. So that's what we got. Talk to you guys later.